If we talk about what the core values are at Cloudflare, it's transparency, curiosity, and being principled, which is really just being long-term oriented, kind of lines up with a lot of how you think about the world, I think. We've just found that we get rewarded for that in lots of different ways, and in ways that are hard. I mean, last year we had 1.5 million people apply for 1,000 jobs.
Welcome back to the Eric Ries Show. What if the mission powering your company turned out to be bigger than you yourself even imagined? In this episode, I sit down with Mathew Prince, co-founder and CEO of Cloudflare, now a $70 billion public company, to tell the story of how a startup that began as a cloud firewall now finds itself defending the very future of the internet. From fending off nation-state cyber attacks to standing up for democracy in Hong Kong when no one else would, not even some of their larger competitors. Cloudflare has become a frontline guardian of digital freedom. Roughly 20% of all internet traffic runs through the Cloudflare network. They defend websites large and small, from your humble blogger to multinational enterprises. I want to call special attention to a story Mathew tells about a time that they gave away their most important product for free, simply because their mission demanded it, and they have an ethos of principled decision-making. It's a story we've seen a lot on this show, an example of the harder is easier style of thinking that unlocks magnetic powers of attraction, alignment, and loyalty. By making principled decisions and having a determination to figure it out, Cloudflare broke through its initial niche market and is now a $70 billion behemoth. But today, the stakes are even higher. Mathew explains how AI is not just disrupting industries, it's dismantling the economic foundation of the web itself. As search engines become answer engines, creators are being cut out of the value chain, threatening the survival of journalism, research, and art, all the things that made the internet special in its early days. I hope you'll find this conversation is a wake-up call, a behind-the-scenes look at how one company is trying to preserve the open internet, and why the next chapter of AI may determine whether we get a better web or lose it entirely. And if you think about it, it's that principled decision-making that has taken their mission from a firewall in the cloud to becoming the internet's passionate defender. I hope you enjoy this incredible conversation about technology, power, and what it means to build something that matters with Mathew Prince. Mathew, thank you very much for doing this. It's always a pleasure to hang out.
It's great to see you.
Yeah. So I have so many questions I want to ask you, and it's just that Cloudflare is such a great story in so many ways. But one of the funniest things I feel like I've ever heard you say, and I don't know if you say this all the time or I happen to hear it, but you said that Cloudflare is basically, some days you feel like it's like a really good blog that that runs a network security company, to have content to write about, just why. And it's just that's funny to me. For those that don't know, Cloudflare has this long history of making just really epic blog posts about the most nerdy and technical topics of how the internet actually works that are totally fascinating. And we'll link to some in the show notes, obviously. But yeah, just why is Cloudflare that way?
At Cloudflare, we started with this pretty simple idea, which was, how could we take a firewall and put it in the cloud instead of you having to buy a box? And the problem that we had was that in order to make that work, for lots of different reasons, the easiest ones to understand are sort of the security side. You need a lot of data to flow through it. And basically, we would have never described ourselves this way, but we were almost like an AI company insofar as we wanted to feed a bunch of data into a bunch of machine learning models, have it then figure out where the threats were and stop them. And so we needed to have a bunch of data. And so what we did was Michelle and I were good little business students. And so we're like, well, what if we just made a version, like a light version that was free? People would sign up, we'd get the data from that. That would then generate all of the information we had, and we would then go and sell it to JP Morgan and big banks and things like that. And I don't think what we appreciated is if you sort of took something that in the past was extremely expensive and nobody could have access to it, and you made it available to everyone signed up, and you got every weird corner of the internet signed up. Some of which were really interesting and fascinating things, some of which are not things that that have caused us all kinds of trouble and problems, which we might talk about. But it just was like all of the internet's challenges all of a sudden arrived at our doorstep, and we never really built the systems to kind of limit signups. So all of a sudden those things were going through it. What happened as a result of that is Next we had all these problems to solve. So the whole hacker community signed up for us. And so then the next thing you knew, they were all trying to hack each other because that's kind of what they do. So they were then all trying to hack us. And so we had to build, a registrar because they hacked into the registrar that we were using previously. We had to build our own DNS infrastructure. We had to build, we didn't start as a DDoS mitigation company. We're the best in the world at that today, but we had to build that because all of a sudden we were getting DDoSed left and right. And so I think that, the story of Cloudflare internally has been, we kind of create these problems for ourselves and then we solve them and those turn into products, but they also turn into really just interesting stories. And I remember one of the times I was if you go back to the early history of Cloudflare's blog, it was awful. It was like, here are 10 reasons why you need a faster website. I mean, it's just, stupid corporate blog stuff. And we were at lunch. There's a guy named Tom Paseka, who's still on our team, who's a network engineer. And we were out to lunch and Google had gone offline. And Tom over lunch was like, yeah, here's why they went offline. And by the way, here's how I helped them get back online. We're like, Tom, that's an amazing story. You should tell that more broadly. And he's like, well, what would I do? And I'm like, well, let's put it up on the blog. And it was one of those moments where, and he's like, first of all, I'm not a network engineer, I'm not a writer. I'm like, I'll help. And so kind of, shepherded him through that. And then he's like, why are we putting this on a corporate blog? It doesn't help us in any way. And I was like, I think one of the privileges that we have is we get to see this really interesting thing that everybody experiences, but nobody really understands how it works, which is the internet. You get to see behind the curtain. And anything we can do to kind of show people this is how it works is actually good for us just to build kind of a reputation and brand trust. But also it's just fascinating, right? And so we should be telling these stories and we should be sharing these things. And so he wrote the whole thing up, and it sort of led to a sort of standard format for a lot of how Cloudflare's blog works, which is here's this interesting thing that you might have noticed that happened online. In order to understand it, you have to understand these, technical things. Let's explain it to you, but try and explain it to you in a way that, will be fascinating for a technical reader, but will be accessible for, someone else. And then we'll get back to explaining the thing that happened online. And that's just been a formula that's really worked for us over and over and over again. And I think that, because we're in this really interesting position where we get to see every crazy thing that happens online, that has allowed us to, tell a lot of those stories. And that's, I think that's super fun. And I think we, at this point, the writing of that, both on our external blog, but if you're a Cloudflare employee, like our internal blog is even better, is, that storytelling has just been a big piece of our culture and a big piece of who we are.
Do you have a favorite internal story that, maybe it's old enough now that you actually can tell it? It's okay.
I remember, we had, we used to, we had all these free customers. And when one of them would come under attack, we sort of had a general heuristic that was like, okay, look at it, see if it's important. If it is, dedicate resources to it and keep it online. But, if it's some random, I don't know, Chinese gaming site, who cares? Kick it off and it's fine because it's taking resources and at the time we were small. This was back in 2014. I think my memory might be slightly off. And I would get a report every morning in my email of here are the sites that we kicked offline overnight. And I remember walking from my apartment, which was in Soma, to our office, and I was reading through the report. And there was one that kind of stood out as like, that seems familiar. And I remember pulling it up and it didn't load. And I kind of started Googling around for it. And it turned out that it was the largest independent newspaper in Ukraine. And the night before, Russia had invaded Crimea and they had launched massive cyber attacks against the media and the banking sector. This media company signed up for us to protect them. They actually tried to pay, but their banking infrastructure was also under attack, so the payment failed. 24-year-old kid who's manning our incident response desk, pulls up a page and it's got a bunch of Cyrillic and guys with guns and a bunch of things. I'm like, oh, this doesn't seem important. Click.
Wow.
Internally, we were like, wow, we just made the world worse. And so we vowed to never make that mistake again. And so we kind of brainstormed, and we were like, listen, we don't want to be the ones who say what's bad online. So we probably shouldn't be the ones who say what's good online. But maybe we could go out there and find like a group of people who are actually, I mean, we're computer scientists, we're not political scientists, so we don't know all the crazy things that are happening in the world all the time. But there are people who do. So let's go partner with them. And we came up with something we called Project Galileo. And we said, listen, when someone is doing something that's politically or artistically important around the world, we will send, they can apply either directly or through one of our partners. And partners were like, I don't know, EFF and the ACLU and Mozilla and a whole bunch of kind of organizations around. If any one of you say that it's politically or artistically important, and it's either a small commercial entity or a nonprofit, then we'll provide our full enterprise class services at no cost, no questions asked. And we're really proud of this. We launch it on a Thursday, we get some press, and then on Friday, Mozilla calls. Like, we have a perfect candidate for this. And we're like, who is it? And they're like, it's popvote.hk. And I remember thinking, is it like American Idol for Hong Kong? Or like, is it, I don't know. I had no idea. And it turned out it was a group of professors in Hong Kong who wanted to hold a referendum on whether democracy rights should be extended in Hong Kong or not. And they'd already gotten Google to say that they were going to provide the infrastructure. And then they were like, can we add you as an additional layer of protection? We're like, sure. And I mean, again, I had no idea how, computer scientists, not political scientists, had no idea how, much of a stir this would be. But there was a certain country that starts with a C and ends with an A, and wasn't Canada or Cambodia or Cuba or Costa Rica, that really did not want this election to happen. Yeah. And on the eve, it was supposed to happen over a weekend. And on the eve of the start of the vote, I got a call from a senior executive at Google. And they said, hey, by the way, we don't want to tell the pop vote folks, but we don't sure that we have the infrastructure that can stand up for what you're about to see.
Wow.
So good luck. And again, we were, I don't know, maybe 100 people. And I remember we brought cots into the office. The pop vote folks extended the vote because they weren't sure we were going to be able to stand up. So they said, well, instead we're going to run it for 10 straight days.
Right.
And I had mistakenly, this was a dumb thing I did. We printed up fortune cookies that when you open it, the fortune was, tonight you'll help save democracy, on the back where the lucky numbers were the IP addresses that we had assigned to them. And then the attacks were just insane. It was one of these first times where you saw a very smart adversary on the other side doing really clever things, like adjusting what cipher suites they were sending traffic to because they knew which ones would be the most costly for us. And you're like, whoa, we're doing this. And for 10 straight days, we kept them online. It was embarrassing for some aspects of the Chinese government. And then I was invited to be the grand marshal in the Hong Kong Freedom Parade, which someone wisely told me that was not a good idea, and I didn't do. But that was a really intense moment in time. Yeah,
it was like a modern day 300. Like you're 100 guys up against.
I have been working out, so I appreciate that you've noticed.
No, and I'm sure in the movie version of the story, you all look great.
Yeah,
just like real life. Just
Matt
like
Damon. I don't know who would play me, but I don't know.
yeah. I'm sure in the comments people can make suggestions. But I just think that's such a fascinating thing, because I think most people do not really have an appreciation for how vast the resources of a nation state are. Mm-hmm. When we talk about sabotage or attacks, defense. I think when you first. I certainly, for the first time I ever heard you talk about Cloudflare, long ago. But certainly, I'm sure when you were sitting there at Harvard Business School thinking about building a firewall for the cloud, like, did you have an appreciation for how much this would wind up being like a geostrategic, geopolitical thing, that you'd be engaged in attack and defense with these like extremely deep pocketed, extremely intense actors?
Yeah, No is the short answer. And I remember the time that it kind of first came into sort of stark relief was there's a guy named Ray Rothrock who was one of our first investors at Venrock, one of these sort of fabled venture capital firms, and we got introduced to him through a woman who's working with him named Defina, and we went into a meeting at the Venrock office down in Palo Alto. And we're, 15 minutes kind of into a pitch, and he's like, got it, understand, only one question. What are you going to do about the death threats? And we're like, the death threats? And because Michelle's there, and sort of, Michelle's my co-founder. And he's like, yeah, if you are successful at this, you're going to piss a lot of really powerful people off because they've been able to basically bully corners of the internet into doing whatever they wanted, and you're gonna make it easier for them to defend. And I think it is still shocking to me when I was on a flight when my phone lit up and it was like, hey, you've just been personally sanctioned by the Russian government. And again, like there's nothing that, and I'm sort of checking the flight paths and making sure like we're not flying over Russia, right? And I remember, those are things that are still surprising, and it is still surprising, the impact we have. The time that was the most like whoa for me was we at some point decided, our mission is to help build a better internet, and we really believe in that. We think about that all the time, and there was a point in time where like the difference between Cloudflare's free service and Cloudflare's paid service was largely, did it include encryption? And we charged for encryption because encryption was expensive computationally for us. It was expensive because we had to procure certificates, all of these things and manage them. And there was a young French engineer on our team. His name is Mathew, and he said, our mission is to build a better internet, help build a better internet. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, a better internet is a more encrypted internet. I'm like, yeah. It's like, why are we charging for encryption then? And this was 2014, probably around the same time as the pop vote stuff. And he just made a super compelling case. And we kind of made this hard decision because it was hard from a business perspective, because the only reason people upgraded from free to paid was encryption. And we were just like, well, now let's make that free. We'll see what happens. And we didn't know if we could pull it off technically. We didn't know, like there was a ton of business development we had to do because we had to go figure out how to take what were incremental costs from each certificate and make that into a fixed cost. And it was just a ton of negotiations to get it done. And I remember though, on September 27th of 2014, we pushed the button where we turned encryption on, and there were all these third-party services that monitored how much of the internet was encrypted. And overnight we doubled it. And like seeing like those step functions that you can have that level of impact and have that level of impact for, decidedly good things. That's the thing that is, that's just amazing. And those are the moments you kind of forget it because you get wrapped up into all the little minutia of, oh, this person is doing this or that or whatever. But when you do see that you can actually change the world, that's pretty amazing, pretty powerful.
So I want to ask you more about that because I don't know if you can even answer this question, but I'm going to try to ask it in a way that maybe you'll be able to, because I think every story you're telling here, starting back, I like that. First of all, I met a lot of business school students who want to start companies. Most of them don't even bother starting, don't even get as far as getting started, let alone to create a company. This is a pretty remarkable ride that you've had. But at each of these moments, you had these moments you were required to decide what the mission of the company really was. I think it would have been really easy. I mean, the Google story is incredible to me because it's like you have a multi-billion-dollar multinational company being like, we're going to duck out of this fight and leave it to the 100 kids on the, with their mattresses in the office, right? Like you could easily, like you could have been like, oh, I see how the world works. I don't need to take on this grief. And so like the mission could have been understood very narrowly as like this, we'll provide this technical service, but you made this choice to make the mission to help build a better internet. And then the more remarkable part of the story to me is that you took it seriously. So there's been times when the logic of that mission has required you to do exceptionally harder work than you otherwise would have, including up into like being sanctioned by nation states and death threats. And like, why put up with all that hassle? Why not just do it the easier way?
Yeah, I mean, I think early on we realized that this was either going to be a 1 or a 0. Like it was either going to work and it was going to be big. And Michelle would always talk about how like her dream was always to, first of all, go work at Google before it's Google, go work at, Meta before it's Meta, go work at Microsoft before it's Microsoft, build one of those really iconic companies. But then also, and this is where, this was not part of my DNA. I think I learned this from her, which was how do you also then, build something where you can look at yourself in the mirror and be really proud of the work that you're doing. I had lots of ideas for companies that were, basically tax collectors at some level. And it wasn't totally clear the real value to just sort of humanity that they would create. Great businesses potentially. But to be honest, even if they were really successful, would have been a tiny fraction of what Cloudflare has been. I think that, we just keep seeing that as we take on big challenges and as we do so in a really principled way, and as we're transparent about that, and as we're sort of relentlessly curious about it. And by the way, I've just articulated, like if we talk about what the core values are at Cloudflare, it's transparency, curiosity, and being principled, which is really just being long-term oriented, kind of lines up with a lot of how you think about the world, I think. We've just found that we get rewarded for that in lots of different ways, and in ways that are hard. I mean, last year we had 1.5 million people apply for 1,000 jobs, and we just get the pick of anyone. Like we don't have to. We're not paying recruiters. We're not out doing those things. Why do people want to do that? Because they want to actually be around places where there is a real mission, and then it's rewarding. And so I think that's what has gotten us to now. At this point, I think the question is, like, I have made more money than I possibly know what to do with. Like that's not what motivated. It's never really been what motivated me. But at this point,
but certainly by now, what do you need more?
I don't need more. But boy, I think that the number of things that are still important, and I think that as this has gone along, I used to think the internet was inevitable. I now realize how fragile it is, and how under attack it is, and how few defenders it has. Like you haven't read a positive story about the internet since 2016, and so I think that I come to work every day excited because personally, because I'm like, we can actually change things. We can make things better. And at this really important time where people have given up on sort of the laissez-faire kind of US-based model of internet governance, sort of people aren't quite ready to go to the sort of total China version, but there's China Light, which is emerging in lots of corners of the world. The underlying business model of the internet is changing, fundamentally in terms of how it's going to work. The sort of patron of the internet for all this time, which has been Google, is retreating in lots of ways because of regulatory pressure and changing business model dynamics. And so I think all of those things just make the work that we do at Cloudflare feel incredibly important. And that's like, people are like, why are you still coming to work? And I'm like, what else could I possibly do that would be as meaningful as what I get to do every day? And that's, I would do that, it has nothing to do with kind of the financial component. I'm proud of the fact that we've made a lot of our employees, wealthy, but right now it's that mission is what I think has always driven us. And I think it is more true today than it's been at any point along the way. By the way, it wasn't me who came up with it. I thought, I remember in business school, people talk about like how being mission driven was so important. I kind of thought that was BS to be. And I thought, missions were those things that the marketing teams came up with and painted on the walls. And that might be true in a lot of places. In our case, we were at a lunch with a bunch of our team in Palo Alto, and we're sitting around and people like, I don't know, some crisis had happened, something had happened. We helped a bunch of customers get through it, and a bunch of the engineers said, almost in unison. Like I've never worked somewhere where I feel like I'm really helping build a better internet, like I do here. And everyone's like,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah, and it just sort of, it kind of clattered around the table, and it came out of that. And it was, and again, I think I was the skeptic who was like, that's marketing gunk. And they're like, no, no, this is important. And it actually resonates.
How
And I
big was the company at that point? How long have you been going, do you think?
probably 50 employees.
Yeah.
So I don't know, 2 years.
I mean, I appreciate the honesty of that story because I'm always struck how many companies the mission is actually discovered. Like it's as if it was like a thing that always existed, and then like you finally figure out what it is that you've been doing this whole time.
Yeah.
And yet
Yeah.
most people don't want to admit that because it makes it feel like, wait, you didn't know what your own mission was. But I think the truth is
Our mission was, I mean, our mission was, it was Peter Pan at some level, right? Our mission was, how do we not take a job in a traditional way? How do we make enough money that we can eat? How do we take advantage of this kind of interesting market opportunity? And how do we impress our parents? Like, why does anyone do anything? Like that's where all these things start. And then every once in a while, especially again, because again, if you either intentionally or in our case, somewhat accidentally stumble into creating a big enough problem that you have to solve, then
Mhm.
then I think missions come out of that. But now,
Totally.
I sit with my friends who run like, I don't know, marketing automation companies, and I'm like, how do you even recruit? Like, and they're super successful companies, but I'm like, how, like,
It's
dude,
very difficult. It's
it's so
very
much harder if you don't
it's
have
difficult
something.
to recruit. It's difficult to align people. Like most of the people in conventional business I talk to are driving themselves crazy, trying to be like, how do I get people to do what I tell them to do? It's like,
Yep,
man, maybe it's because what you're telling them to do doesn't make any sense.
that's right.
Normal people can understand why they would want to enrich you in this way. Like it's not comprehensible to them what's going on. I really appreciate talking about this because you're hitting on, for people who've been listening to the show for a while, you're hitting on themes that have come up again and again. Like we did an episode of Tim O'Reilly talking about create more value than you capture. Here you've already told like 5 of those stories. But also, I have this principle I call harder is easier. It basically by
Totally.
elevating what the mission is to tackle this harder problem, you actually make counterintuitively many other problems that people consider intractable, like basically easy. I mean, business is easy, but just like
Yeah.
life is actually easier when everyone is aligned around doing something extraordinary.
It is easier to to build Cloudflare, like at some level, than it is to build something much smaller
Yeah.
than that. And I think, that, and I don't know if it's number one or number two, but when I talk, we're in a fortunate position now where a lot of entrepreneurs come to us, me and Michelle, for advice. And like, one of the top two mistakes they make is just terrible co-founder choices. Like, and that's like, and you're just, because they always come in, they're like, how did you guys split up the work? And I'm like, you've chosen the wrong co-founder. Um, but the other one is they pick problems that are just way too
Way
small.
too small.
And the easiest way to explain that to them is to explain like venture math and how it doesn't work for that. But again, that's actually the wrong framing. The right framing is people want to work for things that feel like they could be impactful. And yes, you have to compensate people in a way that's fair and do all those things. But for the most part, people are going to trade off, really meaningful work for, the most money they can make 9 times out of 10. And turns out if you do really meaningful work at companies that treat you fairly, you'll also make more money
Yeah.
over time. So
Yeah. I call it having an organizational ethos where like the business model and the strategy and the culture, everything is aligned around some larger aspiration that promotes human flourishing.
yeah,
So that people can get excited about that in a way that they just can't a conventional business. It's not possible. They can try, but so okay. So
the question is though, is it, I mean, I guess that I think that's all right. The question is how much though how much can you engineer that in the beginning versus how much of that is sort of just the survivor bias of the things that work end up having that. But
well,
like we
that's what I
didn't have
want.
that day one. It's like
That's what I want to talk to you about because I know a lot of people are like, well, I don't have it, so I don't have the right stuff. If I was only as smart as Mathew, then But it's like I think it's actually very helpful for people to understand how long it took you to figure it out, how much
yeah,
patience you had to have with it, but also, and here's the thing I really want to push you on because I've been advising people to do this for years now, and I love to think principle to see the positive externalities of of these actions that you've taken. I mean, the encryption one is a perfect one where it's like the costs are very clear and easy to document, and the benefits are completely intangible.
Yeah. And
And
by the
so
way,
it's,
our conversion rates went down a little bit.
yeah, like you're giving money away.
But the rate of the signups went up an order of magnitude.
Right. So it was a good trade in the end.
Totally good trade.
But you didn't
Right?
know that was
Assuming
going to
unit
happen.
economics of the business work, which they do, and all those things. But it like absolutely, it was a good trade. But it was not. It wasn't obvious, and it wasn't like we did a ton of analysis and thought, oh, if we do this, then our it was
Yeah,
it was
exactly.
just like it came down to Mathew Prince saying a better internet is a more encrypted internet, and if we really believe in our mission, then that's what we're going to do.
The if we really believe in our mission question is one of the most important questions an employee can ask. And so like, if we break that story down into its component parts, you have a culture where he felt comfortable saying that to you.
That's right.
So that required, first of all, that you had a worthwhile mission in the first place. If you'd never had that dinner in Palo Alto, talking about what the mission should be, this would never have been possible.
But we didn't, to be clear,
Yeah.
we didn't have a dinner talking about what the mission should be.
Well, yeah, sorry. Yeah, I don't, yeah, exactly.
We just literally had it was a lunch, and we're sitting around, and someone's like, hey, I just had this thought. I really like my job, and here's why, and articulate. And then another people said it, and then it was probably Michelle. I don't even actually remember how it kind of got bubbled up, but we just kept coming back,
feeling it. You could feel the rightness of it over time. Yeah. So like,
but it wasn't. And I get it. This is not. Oh gosh, Matthew's so smart. I've tried to kill so many of our good ideas 1,000 times.
Yeah.
But if you just let good ideas, if you don't just if you don't think you're the smartest person in the room,
that is helpful.
And you just give air cover for it. So today, what is my biggest job today? I think my biggest job today is to convince people that it's okay for them to fail miserably 20% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's safe. Now, a lot of asterisks, like you have to fail honorably, and that doesn't mean commit fraud, and you can't make the same mistake over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
But it usually takes, let's say, 2 hours to get to the 80% right answer, and it can take 2 years to get to the 100% right answer. And everyone is trained that 100% matters, whereas, boy, 80% is usually right. So get to 80%, which inherently then means you're going to be wrong 20% of the time. But then you that has to be safe, and you have to know this is the case. We've had horrible outages caused by employees where they pushed a bad line of code.
Mm-hmm.
And when we have outages really, really bad, like I remember getting a call from a large transportation company CEO who was like, hey, when are you going to be back online? I'm like, so sorry, any second now, we're fixing it, sorry. He's like, good, because there are planes that can't land when your network is offline, and they're running out of fuel.
No pressure.
No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure, but get this fixed.
Nobody has ever been fired for that. Because again, that's not a failure of them. That's a failure of us not building the systems to do it. I mean, most cases,
the system is so easy to take down that an individual person can do it. Shame on you.
Shame on us. But also, you can't create a culture where, yes, you make a horrible mistake and it costs us a lot, where you're punished for that. You have to be safe to make those mistakes. 20% of the time. And again, we should be honorable. If you're doing malicious, fraudulent, bad things, of course that's bad. Get out. But if you're trying to do the right thing and you're right 80% of the time, that inherently means you're going to be wrong 20% of the time. And I think my job is to try and make that safe. And in different cultures around the world, it's harder. In Lisbon, where we have a big office, it's very historically hierarchical. And so we really have to train people on no, don't wait. Go do the thing. In Singapore, where we have a big office, same thing. You gotta do that. But when you do that, again, you can move so much faster if you make people feel it's okay to be wrong sometimes.
I love that, because here we're talking about the thing I really want to push you on, which is how do we make these broad principles operational? People hear harder is easier. They hear create more value than you capture, hear positive, they hear about the power of open source or whatever. And it's okay, but how do we do it? Because at the end of the day, spreadsheet thinking is indoctrinated into us so hard. So again, going back to the encryption story, and I think it's really important for people to understand this. Not only did you not know if it would be a good idea or a bad idea, it's not like you were on the fence about it. So let's say you did it and it was marginally more, you made marginally more money or marginally less money. Like that wasn't the reason you did it. And you understood somehow, and we're going to get into the how. So that's what I want to understand. You understood that the trust you would win from your employees, from your customers, like from the world at large, by doing the right thing in a principled way, explaining why you did it that way, that was worth more than whatever the cost would be. Even in situations like where you're sleeping in the office because you're under team, like even when you're facing extraordinary difficulties or you're giving stuff away for free, like again and again and again. So like, how have you been able, on an operational matter, to help people in the company understand that being trustworthy is so valuable?
Well, and I'm dodging the question because I don't know the answer, but I will also say
I told you that at the beginning.
Spreadsheets still matter, like because there's a bad lesson to learn in this, which is, oh my gosh, what we should do is just give everything away for free.
Yep.
Like we're still a business, like it still has to pencil out. Like you have to figure that out. And so for us, we just obsessed over costs. So it was just, how do you like it? Like you had to drill into everyone's head. Like there are real costs here, and there's only this much money in the bank account, and it keeps getting smaller. And we have to stop playing the game if it gets too small. So
yeah, now how does that serve the mission?
how does that serve? And you've got so it isn't just the mission. We're the mission and no business. It has to be a business that supports the mission.
Yeah, the alignment of those things together.
And I think that it's really tough to start with. I really think it's tough to start with the mission. I think if you start with the mission, at some level, it's BS. Like at some level, now you're just acting as a marketer.
Totally.
I think you've got to start with the business. But then you've got to just figure out how, like in the craziest case, how could the business just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger? And then inherently, as you do that, the mission will emerge, I think, from that. And so I think, but then you have to honor, like, whoa, this is like, we got here through a little bit of smart, a little bit of luck, a little bit of clever, a little bit of smart marketing or branding or engineering, whatever it is. But we got here, and we see a path where this can keep getting bigger. And if we look back and study the history of that a part of what that was we aligned around these sort of set of relatively small set of principles. And then I think the missions come out of that. That certainly was the story for us. I don't know, I mean, you're now it's
no, that's almost
go do some research, but it's like,
yeah, no, that is almost always how it works out. And it's why we kind of have this tension in our society between like the idea of the founder as this like heroic visionary versus like this anti-founder idea that like companies basically emerge out of market dynamics. So a market need summons the company out of the ether, and the founder kind of had nothing to do with it. And it's like both of those stories have a certain truth to them, but they're also missing something essential, because the true answer, as I said, is that companies are these living beings that are born. And so their attributes are discovered, not made.
That's right.
And if you have the humility to see that, then a company like discovering this aligned business model mission like thing becomes like something you can be excited about, and then start to feel a sense of stewardship about, like, oh, I need to defend and protect and nurture this thing and feed it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I remember there's Steve Ballmer did a 2-hour podcast relatively recently talking, and I can't remember what podcast it was, but I sat and listened, and it's fascinating that even in like 98, 99, 2000, how vulnerable they still felt. Like, and I think it's genuine. Like, I think you don't realize the market power that you have and the influence that you have, because you don't see it all that time. You see all the little stuff, you see all your losses, you see all the problems. And it's only every so once in a while that you move the graph so much that you go, whoa, we actually matter. And I think that's like, that interior anxiety, which we still have in spades. Like we're constantly, always feeling like we're, like we're the little guy. I mean, our New York office is the top floor of the frickin' World Trade Center. Like, I mean, we've done okay, but again, we still feel like
that mindset.
We're in that way. And it was fascinating to see Microsoft, the $4 trillion company today, like still having in its early days, that same level of that. And I think that's part of what it is that you can find these interesting nuggets. In our case, nobody knew who we were. Like, yeah, we would go to business school, but that doesn't give you any credibility in the valley. So, like, investors would call our early employees somewhat, lovingly, somewhat insultingly, the land of misfit toys, because we were begging, borrowing, and stealing. And it was this just quirky group of people.
Mhm.
But I think that ultimately gives you an enormous advantage. Like, if I started a company today, it'd be easy to recruit a bunch of people, right? But I'm not sure, but I'm not sure you'd have that same
No,
sort of
that magic
insecurity.
is
Yeah,
unusual,
and
because you
it's
have people who are true believers, that believers before they knew it was going to be a source of fame and fortune.
I'm not sure they were true. So I don't know that they were true believers. I think they were. I mean, they were. I think a lot of them, certainly early on, were also just desperate for a job. Like, because it was Misfit Toys. It was like we had a guy named Shri who was like our first technical operations manager. Like, he and his wife had made a deal where they had a kid. They're going to take 4 years off. He was going to take the first 2 years. She was going to take the second 2 years, and they were going to trade off their careers to help raise a kid. I mean, really super honorable. But you drop out of the workforce for 2 years, and it's hard to get a job. And so he'd worked at Yahoo, and they quit. And so everybody else was like, he shows up to our office in this misfitting suit. It was a black suit, looked like he was going to a funeral. And we all made fun of him. But of course we hired him because he was a genius. But you're gonna find out it was Mathew, the guy I mentioned already. I mean, his French. He really loved the United States. He wanted to be in the country. He looked for anyone who'd get him an H-1B visa, basically. He took this job as a front-end developer. This is a guy that's like hardcore C, low-end, like computing stuff.
We would take whatever job was
He
available.
would take whatever job it was. And so I like found him on LinkedIn. And I wrote to him, I was like, you look underemployed. And so but did he believe in that? Did he believe that we were? No,
No, but I would say that you believed in them
problems.
at a time when everybody else didn't.
Yeah, and needed them, like needed bodies. There was another guy we didn't end up hiring who I remember, like, one of the lowest moments in Cloudflare. I had gone to lunch with a guy who actually ended up then being our outside counsel, and we were sort of just talking to him about. I was talking to him about whether he'd do this. I was eating a chicken sandwich down in Palo Alto, and I took a bite of this chicken sandwich, and he told a joke, and I kind of laughed. And unbeknownst to me, I didn't chew it enough, and it got stuck in my esophagus. Now, so not your windpipe, you can still breathe, but you can't eat anymore. And you get this vagal response where all of a sudden your blood pressure drops and you feel just awful. And so I stopped eating, and the rest of it, and Michelle saw me, she was like, "You look awful." And I remember we went to interview this guy who we had to find a restaurant that would let him come in barefoot because he refused to wear shoes. And he had all these. I mean, literally, it was literally like, I don't
funky,
look on Tuesdays if the moon is full. Or I did it, and I have to have, this is what and we're like, yeah, we can accommodate that. We can accommodate.
That's what early stage is like. That's what it's like. Yeah.
And I remember I was eating like corn chips, and I could eat one chip, I could eat two chips, and I eat the third chip. All of a sudden, I had this just absolute need, in a very strange way, to vomit. And so I kept running to the bathroom. I didn't know there was a piece of chicken stuck in my esophagus. I kept running to the bathroom, throwing up. And I remember on the floor of this Mexican restaurant, there was a place that would allow you to show up without shoes, holding on to the toilet, thinking, I just really don't know if this is worth it. Like, it was, but that's how desperate you are early on.
That's what it's like. Oh God, that's anybody who's actually done this is going to have PTSD just listening to tell these stories. All had those moments. You're like, what on earth am I doing? And I appreciate
it. Contrast that with now we get 1.5 million people applying to work for us. So it's like, but people are like, do you miss the old days? I'm like, no.
No, yeah, exactly. Don't get nostalgic about it once you remember what it was like. But I want to ask you about this though, because you're talking about how big the company is now, and you've got this massive valuation, big public company. Congratulations, like it's been quite a ride. But and you've been talking about the advantages of getting bigger and having these resources and having this big mission. But then you and I both know a lot of your contemporaries. The fact that they got big and they made all this money has kind of driven them crazy. And the company has kind of bit by bit like deviated from its mission. I mean, I don't mean to pick on Google because, they're an easy target, but like, Google's come a long way from don't be evil. Even just in the stories that you were just telling just a minute ago, where it's like, oh my God, whatever happened to them? But like that's not unique to Google. We've seen a lot of companies that have had mission drift, have
Yeah.
become bureaucratic, have been taken over, or for the founders been forced out, or even we have founders who are in there, but kind of like they haven't been able to preserve what made the company special in the way, frankly, that Cloudflare has. And a lot of those guys. Like, what do you attribute that to?
Well, I mean, again, when Google was our size, I think they were still, very mission driven. I mean, Google's problem at some level is they're like they were like the kid who got straight A's in high school and was prom king or queen and like the problem is everything after that looks so much harder. I remember when I was talking to an investor at one point, and they were like, "Who has a better business, Google or Amazon?" It's like, well, I was kind of equivocated and kind of, he's like, no, clearly Amazon, because Amazon started with the world's worst business and made it work, and everything after that is going to get better and better and better. Whereas Google started with the world's perfect business, which makes everything after it look worse and worse and worse. And that's just a curse. That's super hard. So if you end up catching the car as a dog on your first run down the road, like it's
Yeah.
gonna get, it's like everything else is a disappointment. And so that's that. And I think Google, they just made so much money that they didn't have that discipline in some levels. That has not been our problem. Like
You've had to work for it.
we're a lot more like Amazon in they just relentlessly frugal. Like we don't have our own chefs or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's just not in our nature to do that. Again, I think these things are super fragile, and there is a challenge that you have to keep growing, right? And so if you stop growing, then the bureaucrats come in and the spreadsheets come in, and that's when other things take off. If you can continue to have a big enough total market that you can continue to expand it, and like we're 1 or 2% penetrated into that market that we have, and so we're a long way from having to just like, okay, let's figure out how to crank every penny out. That's just not, we don't have to do that, because there's just still so much stuff to do. But again, law of large numbers, all this stuff catches up. We're still run by humans. At some point, like I'll get old and have to retire, and that succession planning and how you think about those things, those are all places where you risk, losing some of that. And the best way to defend against it is just to make sure, I think, that it is that you still, that one of the things you're hiring for are you want to come here because there's a mission, and we're aligned toward that mission. So, but I don't know. I worry about it. I don't worry about kind of, will we lose following the mission? I worry about stuff that will happen before that. Like, will innovation slow down? Will we stop taking as many audacious bets? Will we, and then just the basic things that, it's harder for, once upon a time we launched a product and we're like, yeah, that might get $1 million of revenue. And next year we'd be like, that's so cool. Like now $1 million of revenue, like, yeah. And so,
right.
you just keep,
it's hard to celebrate those early wins.
And Clay Christensen was a, professor of mine. And I mean, he talked, this is
may he rest in peace.
A lot of these problems, a lot of the innovator's dilemma problems come back to, you have to keep growing. And so each bet has to get successively bigger, and then the stakes get higher. And then eventually, somebody kind of puts in a box. And so for us, we're always like, okay, we have a traditional product and engineering organization, which is 90% of our work, but we've got this other little protected thing in the corner we call ETI, which is emerging technology incubation, which, by the way, we're looking for the guy who was the head got promoted to be our CTO. So we're looking for a new head of this job. It is the coolest job in tech.
That's definitely one of the coolest jobs on the internet you can have.
It's absolutely the coolest job in tech.
Tell your friends, apply for this job.
You get a little like startup inside this big organization and I will yell at you if you don't fail 90% of the time.
If you're not taking enough risk.
Because right now their failure rate's about 50%. And I'm like, enough risk. Like you got it. You should be failing 90% of the time.
Gotta think bigger. Gotta think bigger. Wow, that's a cool job. Yeah.
And it's a super cool job. So
Yeah. I think I would like that. I think I like that job.
yeah, Eric, we are hiring. So
I know.
it's a really cool
now
job.
I'm like, I have 25 other jobs already, but that sounds pretty fun for me. All right. I will think of somebody who I can live vicariously through to recommend for that job. That sounds really fun.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to your idea of defending the internet, because I think the other thing that we've seen as a recurring pattern in my life and in these interviews is when people pick these audacious missions, and when you finally kind of learn what it is and commit to it in this principled way as you have, it pulls you into new business opportunities that you could never have imagined that you would get pulled into, but then in retrospect, it makes perfect sense. And so you've talked about all these different forms of attack and defense you've had to do, but it's recently pulled you into this really major controversy about AI and the business model of the internet, which I think is totally fascinating. I mean, speaking as someone who creates a lot of content that these models are trained on. Here you've taken on defending the internet from a totally different vector. This is not like DDoS. It's not cybercrime the way we normally would think about it. And yet it is like a very major shift in what is possible as a small independent publisher. So can you just talk a little bit about how you got interested in that problem in the first place and how you see it as fitting into Cloudflare's mission to do something about it?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is to really understand this, you have to understand, if Michelle is listening, she's about to kill me, but I'm a recovering law professor. And so I love history lessons. Michelle's like, stop with the history lessons. But so let's do a brief history of the internet.
I'm on team history, so go for it.
Go, team history. So, in my early days on the internet, there wasn't a business to it. It was just a quirky set of things. The business was basically getting that actual connectivity. So the ISPs were the ones collecting the money, but then the content that was created was just people sharing stuff. And it was a mishmash of all kinds of things. Eventually, about 25 years ago, a business starts to emerge. And the key understanding that smart people forget is the internet has never been free. Like someone has always paid for the content that is out there. And for the last 25 years, the someone has largely been Google. And the trade has been that Google invented this, like one of the world's perfect businesses. Like let's let people tell us their hopes and dreams and desires and things they want to buy. We will run a marketplace where we don't have to hold any inventory, but we will match buyers and sellers. And then we'll take on an auction basis, basically commission off of that sell that's there. Well, amazing business. But in order to make it work, they needed not just for people to, type in, I want to buy, a new car. They wanted them to type in everything into this to get enough inventory to, again, sell these ads again.
Yep.
But in order to do that, they had to collect all the internet, and they needed the internet to expand. And so the currency that Google basically created was traffic. If you got traffic, like search delivered traffic to you, and then Google actually built all the infrastructure. They bought DoubleClick and other things in order to build the infrastructure to help then anyone who is creating content turn that traffic into revenue, into dollars, right? So that they could eat, so that the internet would grow. And that for the last
Google's point of view, so that they would make more content.
And it was this super virtuous cycle. And the way that the folks at Google talk about it is they're like, we have been the patron to the ecosystem that is the internet. And that is true. Now, you may not like ads, or you may think that Google tracks you too much. You may think blah, 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 blah. But the internet that we have today exists because Google built this perfect just money generation machine. And they took some of that money and they shared it out with content creators that were all over the world. So that gets us to, certainly 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it starts to shift. Like back in the day, the way that Google worked was you type something in, and then they gave you a treasure map, 10 blue links that you would click on. And then, you'd ask it a question and you go kind of then hunt through and find their things. And Larry and Sergey used to brag about how their job was to get people off of google.com as quickly as possible. That's why they put even the little clock up in the upper right-hand corner that told you how long it took for them to generate those queries, because it was all about get people off Google as fast as possible. It started changing about 10 years ago with the introduction of the answer box, which was if you typed in something like, what year was Cloudflare founded? Instead of getting a treasure map, you got an answer, right?
It just tells you the answer. Yeah.
And it was right on the page. And that kind of over the last 10 years started to expand. And at the same time, if you think about it, back in the day, if you think of like the content creators as a frog, Google came along and said, "Hey, frog, here's a pot of water. Jump in." And you're like, "Oh, I'm a frog. I like water. Thank you, Google." And you're sort of swimming around, and they turned the temperature up a little bit, but not that much, because they needed to keep growing. They needed to show more revenue, so that, they were taking a little bit more from the ecosystem for themselves, but on net still supporting the ecosystem. Right around the introduction of the answer box is when they turned it up, and the answer box made it about 3 times harder to get traffic back to your site for the same amount of content that you created as it was before. And so over the last 10 years, as the answer box has gotten more robust, that temperature has gone up from maybe a 1 in the beginning to now like a 3. And then something changed, which is in the last 8 months, Google introduced this thing called AI overviews. And we've all seen it now where you type something into Google. And what's changed, I think, in both of those things is Google is progressing from being a search engine, which is a search is like a hunt. It's like a treasure map, right? And like these things, to being an answer engine. And those are different things. Search engine drives traffic. It gives you kind of a map and you go choose your own adventure. An answer engine gives you the answer, but you don't actually go follow that thing.
Right. So no traffic is generated for the underlying sources.
Right. And so that frog in the last 8 months has gone from a 3 to about a 9. It's a little over 9, actually. It's almost 10 times as hard as the Google of old to get traffic. Now, again, history of the internet, like Google's not doing this because they're trying to screw the publishers. They actually believe in the ecosystem. They're trying to support the ecosystem. They're trying to do the right thing in the ecosystem, but they are responding to competitive pressure from folks like OpenAI and Perplexity and others that have launched kind of what they've described as a new search engine. It's not search engine. They're not search engines at all.
Search at all. Yeah, absolutely.
They're answer engines. They're answer engines. And that's not to say that's not incredibly valuable for the end user. Like, it's better if I can go in and say,
even leaving the issues of hallucinations and everything aside, in the old model, you had this alignment that when the user is satisfied, then the publisher is also satisfied. So it was a genuine alignment of interests. And here we have these examples of these upstarts who are making astronomical amounts of money, and the user is maybe is satisfied from that, but the publishers are getting nothing.
That's right. And so if the trade before was, I get your content and in exchange I send you traffic, that's the search engine trade. The answer engine trade, which is what Google is becoming, although they're sort of a hybrid between them today. What an OpenAI, a Perplexity, an Anthropic is today, is that answer engine. And how much worse is that for publishers? If you look at the Google of old, 10 years ago Google, and you compare that with someone like an OpenAI, they are now, I can do the math in my head because we just got the updated numbers, 850 times more difficult to get one click back to your original.
Who clicks on the citations anymore?
Right. And that's the good case. That's what OpenAI and Perplexity are at. If you look at someone like Anthropic, they are 36,000 times harder to get traffic back to the original source. And again, that's not to say they're bad guys. They're not bad, but in fact, and they've created these incredibly valuable tools that are good for their users, but they are doing that off of the content which is out there. And they're saying, well, we should be able to do it because Google can do it. And it's like, well, except you're a different thing. You're an answer engine, not a search engine. Google is becoming an answer engine. And as a result,
it seems to me like a tragedy of the commons, where the internet was this incredible free resource for everybody to use. And if you overgraze it, like you starve the people who produce the content of their ability to make the content, which we've already been seeing. I mean, think about the demise of local news, and like one after another of source of content is being starved of revenue while the platforms are making a huge amount of money.
And even like at risk of overstating it, Everything wrong in the world today is Google's fault.
That doesn't seem like an overstatement to me.
A little bit of overstatement. But Google taught us that the deity that we should be worshiping as content creators was traffic. Traffic has never actually been that good a proxy for value.
Yeah.
And you look at, I remember sitting with the team at the Huffington Post where they would talk about, they'd take a piece of content and they would A/B test headlines and they didn't phrase it quite this way, but this is what they meant, for which one generated the largest cortisol response. And whichever one did, that's what they would run. And then, by the way, when people get numb to that, then they'd run the engine again on the same piece of content to generate more cortisol response, because the goal was rage bait people into clicking things. And so inherently that leads.
I mean, you're really saying that the whole social media era, like the lesson was learned from Google, that traffic is ultimately the thing to generate.
That's right. And so Google, teaches us the deity is traffic. That begets Facebook, which begets TikTok. And all of it feels like we're spiraling into this black hole of kind of just nihilistic. I mean, we don't need, with all due respect to Ben Smith and everyone, like, we don't need BuzzFeeds, right? We need more original content that actually is moving human knowledge forward,
totally,
as opposed to just generating as much cortisol response as we can. And yet that's exactly what the kind of whole system of rewards based on traffic got you. So I'm not arguing that the ecosystem of old was perfect and healthy. It for sure wasn't. I'm not arguing that that AI companies are bad. They're not. They're great, incredible technology. What I'm arguing is that the fuel that runs all these AI companies, the fuel that pumps their engines, is original content. And the people that create that content deserve to be compensated. And if we're not going to compensate them through traffic, there has to be a new business model to compensate them. And if that doesn't happen, like there's sort of the nihilistic version, there's the Black Mirror version, and then there's the version that I hope is kind of my optimistic version. The nihilistic version is there won't be any more journalists, there won't be any more researchers, there won't be any more academics. Content is dead. It's just going to be AI generated slop. I don't think
that's a grim future.
That's a grim future, right? I don't think that's going to happen. The Black Mirror version is not that we go back to the media days of the 1900s, but we go back to the media days of the 1400s, right? And it's the Medicis, right? There are 5 powerful families, the 5 big AI companies. There's the conservative one that's funded by Peter Thiel, and then there's the liberal one that's funded by, I don't know, Eric Schmidt, and then there's the Chinese one, and then the European try to build one and then fail and then end up using the US liberal one, and then there will be the Indian one that's out there, and there will be all these different ones, and they themselves will employ all of the journalists, researchers, academics behind them. And that's not inconceivable. It's not that many steps from what someone like Scale AI was doing, where they were tagging data. The next step is just creating that data. And it's very expensive to do it that way, but maybe that
technology might be worth it.
Yeah, it might be, but
it might be so valuable that it would be worth it to pay all those people.
And what an incredible loss to humanity, though.
Also a very dark timeline.
These silos that are there, and that's the Black Mirror version. And so the version I think is the optimistic one, is that let's imagine, and again, before we even get to what the business model is or anything else, just imagine that in the future that the sum total of the AIs put together is a pretty good representation of best mathematical representation we've ever had of human knowledge. Right? So it's not perfect, but it's pretty darn good, right? It's like a giant block of Swiss cheese. And there are holes in the cheese. And if we could create a system where you as a journalist, or you as an academic, or you as a researcher are rewarded for filling in those holes, and you're compensated for that, both in terms of financial compensation, but also in terms of just ego and recognition, because that's
absolutely
important. The financial one will be able to fix. The ego and recognition is a much harder problem, actually.
Well, and that's what powered the early internet before Google.
Totally. And then, because I get that. And by the way, it turns out that that original content is the thing that the AI companies are craving the most. You look at who's done the biggest deals with AI companies. Reddit. Last year, Reddit disclosed that they were paid $140 million by Google and OpenAI for access to their content. That is a significantly larger deal than the New York Times has gotten for their content. And what does Reddit symbolize? Reddit symbolizes the kind of old internet, the quirky, fun, goofy internet. And so like what we're seeing from the market today is that old internet that we all crave, that we all remember, that we're all fantasizing over, that's actually the thing that is the most valuable. And so again, if we
There's more intelligence encoded in there probably than in the New York Times, sadly.
I mean, because again, it's like the New York Times is not BuzzFeed, but it's closer to BuzzFeed than it is to Reddit.
Well, and the New York Times isn't what it once was.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some parts of it that are amazing. There's some parts that are just chasing, rage baiting headlines. But I think that if we could get a way to incentivize, like, how do you fill in the holes in the cheese and fill it in with that stuff which is actually furthering human knowledge and quirkiness and art and all of those things, like that's the business model that we should be playing for. And that's what we're trying to think through, because we know that the old business model of ads and subscriptions doesn't work in a new world where
there's no traffic. There's not enough traffic to support it. Absolutely.
That's right.
Okay. So you come a long way from firewall in the cloud to the Swiss cheese of human knowledge and paying people to fill it in. But to me, that is just such the story of a transformative mission and why it's so powerful.
But it's the same mission, right? Sure.
Yeah. Well, so explain that, because I don't think to people from the outside that actually makes that much sense.
Okay. So let's just think about it like existential risk to Cloudflare. If the internet ceases to exist, our business is over.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to do everything we can to help the internet exist. If the business model of the internet breaks, then the internet's going to break. And so from just an existential threat perspective, like we have to do everything we can to protect that. From a mission perspective, our mission is to help build a better internet.
If there's no internet, you failed.
If there's no internet, we failed. And by the way, I think a better internet is not with all due respect to BuzzFeed, is not a BuzzFeed internet. A better internet is more of a Reddit internet. And so and by the way, you should be able to have both and like all these things. But I think that like there's a lot of people who long for, gosh, I wish there were more of that. And you just see when these interesting, quirky things come up, they still create.
Totally, it's such a hunger for it.
And then, because 80% of the AI companies are our customers. So like, we want them to succeed too. And what we see is that there are three things you need to be an AI company. You need access to GPUs. And someone like OpenAI reportedly spent like $10 billion a year on GPUs. Is that number going to go up or down? It's silicon. There has never been a silicon shortage that hasn't turned into a silicon glut.
Right.
And you can say, oh, but this time is different. No, it's not. Like there's going to be huge advances in silicon. It might be that they still spend $10 billion on silicon.
Yeah, but what they're
going to get out of that is going to be millions of times more resources. And at some point, the curve will bend and the cost will come down, right? So that will increasingly become a commodity over time, for sure. Second is talent. Spend billions of dollars. OpenAI alone spends billions of dollars a year on talent. Like what happens there? Well, again, talent market's fairly efficient. Every university in the world right now is spinning up a PhD program in, machine learning, AI, all these things.
You're definitely going to see supply and demand make a dent here. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like, I think that the days, like if your strategy is, I'm going to go make $1 billion by, getting that job at Facebook, I think that ship sailed. Like, and again, I don't think we're going to go to a, glut of great AI engineers. But we're certainly not going to have the massive shortage that we have today. It's going to become a much more common.
It'll be alleviated. Yeah.
It's knowledge. It's like we can pass this on. And so that increasingly also becomes a commodity. And so what's left, the third leg of the stool, is content. And my prediction would be that the AI companies of the future look less like research labs and more like Netflix, where what they actually compete on
financing content.
Who has unique content. So you're a chatbot for teen girls who are lonely. Taylor Swift comes out with a new interview. And all of a sudden, you versus all your competitors are offered a chance to have it exclusively for the next week. How much is it worth to you?
Right. It's worth a lot.
And so that content is really powerful. And I was, the most interesting conversation I've had in the last 6 months was I flew up to Stockholm to meet with Daniel Ek, who's is so thoughtful and so interesting. And then is compensated
Spotify.
Yeah, founder of Spotify. Compensated creators at scale, unlike anyone else. And you can quibble with Spotify, but just the straight numbers are that the day before Apple launches iTunes, 99 cents a song, the entire music industry, the valuation, not the revenue, the valuation is $8 billion. Last year, Spotify sent $10 billion alone, and that doesn't count Apple Music and Tidal and YouTube and
Spotify,
TikTok, just Spotify, $10 billion to music creators, right? So this pie has actually grown pretty substantially. So these technology shifts can grow the pie. Now it's shifted, like music labels have less power, independent musicians have more power, like it shifted around. But the story that he told that I thought was so fascinating is they queried, people type things into Spotify, they ask questions, and there are certain queries they don't have good answers for. So let's say that somebody queries for, I want a song to a disco beat about how much fun it is to dance with your cat. That song does not exist. So they actually take that query and then they publish it back to the music creator community. And there are creators out there that are making tens of millions of dollars a year writing songs for those things that people are searching for that there aren't good songs for yet. And I think
it's like the Google era internet.
That's so much better than BuzzFeed, right? That's actually, I wanted an emotion to be represented. It didn't exist, and you helped me create it, and you made money in the process. Like, that's great, and that's what I hope we can figure out in what is inevitably going to be a more AI-driven future of the web. We still need to figure out some business model where content creators get compensated. And at the end of the day, it's going to have to be some version of a share of whatever it is that you're paying as a subscription for the AI company or the ad revenue they generate, whatever. A share of that is going to has to
flow back to the people that still live in Hawaii.
But it's Netflix, it's Spotify. We know how these businesses work. Now it's just a matter of how do you catalyze that happening.
So one of the things I find really fascinating, maybe because you're a law professor, your law professor background maybe that has made you thoughtful on this point, is that certain tech companies have gone beyond just being a normal business with like a regular business model and have passed over to the stage I call becoming civic infrastructure. That is, they're part of the civic fabric. They're institutions that are governing people's lives in ways that I think a lot of tech founders, frankly, are not equipped to be thoughtful about. And you've had many run-ins with this function of having to like police, well, what speech is, what is available? Like if you're going to defend the internet, you've had to make value choices about what is better and what is worse. An internet that is driven by Western liberal values is better than one that is determined by, the intelligence services of foreign nations. That's not, I don't think, the hardest call, but other of your peer companies have had trouble even with that one. You very famously have had to deal with, the so-called deplatforming of Nazis and other unsavory parts. I'm sure you've had to do even more of it than is publicly known. That's like a regular recurring feature that you've had to grapple with. And here at the end, we're talking about helping a disruption pass through the internet, a technological disruption. Yep. And I think one of the biggest things, and Clay and I used to talk about Clay Christensen, one of the biggest misconceptions people have about disruption is that when an industry or an institution is disrupted, the civic values that were attached to that automatically transfer to the new thing that replaces it, which is absolutely positively not true. When you replace journalism with Facebook or with Google, there's all kinds of academics who study this. You don't necessarily get the good results. And I think part of the issue in our society today is the people who did that disruption, when they got to a certain level of scale and success, they didn't want to or were not willing to grapple with their responsibility as the stewards of civic infrastructure. And so here you are yet again having to take what was supposed to just be a firewall in the cloud business. And now you're having to deal with this civic question of like, how is it that human knowledge should be compensated and generated? So first of all, I applaud you for being willing to take that on in an open way rather than kind of running away from your responsibilities there. But I'm just curious, what's it like feeling like you've had to embrace these kind of moral questions, these civic questions that are, that are just a side effect of being in business.
Like if we were just a firewall in the cloud company, I don't think I'd still be CEO. Like that wouldn't, that would be like we would have made money and that would have done that. I think that what excites me about what we get to do is that we have a seat at the table of talking about these larger issues. And I don't pretend we know all the right answers. And by the way, like I've sat in those meetings at Facebook. I've sat in those meetings at Google. I've sat in those meetings at Microsoft and Apple and seen very thoughtful, really nuanced debate over what the pros and cons are. I'm not sure that it's fair to say that the people sort of in those positions ran away from their responsibility. I think that what is more the case is that this cult of secrecy in the Valley, where tech companies become these bubbles, and people, and there are really robust debates inside the bubbles, but they don't share them outside. They want to look infallible and they want to look unified. None of these, like Microsoft is basically Beirut in 1984, right? Google is, there's so many fiefdoms inside of Google.
Sure, well, every once in a while we get a glimpse from a whistleblower.
Totally. And you're
like, oh my God, what is going on over there?
What is going on? But I think that if you, like what we have tried, one of our core values is transparency.
Yeah.
And we believe that both internally, but externally as well. When we screw up, we talk about this. And so like you bring up neo-Nazis and you're like, oh, you must have had to deal with that all the time. Not really. Like there are 3 incidents in 15 years. Our mean time to incident is 5 years in terms of these things. For the most part, this stuff gets settled pretty easily before it gets down to us because things that are really bad are illegal, and illegal is easy to deal with.
Right.
And so, but every once in a while, and again, we're due for another one. So undoubtedly it's going to happen. But like, we actually, that is not as much like that particular thing isn't. Why do you ask me about? Why does everyone ask me about it? Because instead of us just being like, it was a violation of terms of service, paragraph 13G, they were kicked off the network, no comment. Instead, we're like, listen, let me tell you why this is hard. And you may not care about neo-Nazis. I don't care about neo-Nazis. I think neo-Nazis are horrible people. I want to have them, if I could snap my fingers and they would all go away, that'd be great. But like, what do you really want me to have that power of snapping my fingers? Because even back then, when we started to make those decisions back in sort of the 2015 timeframe, like it was clear that we were going to be important and that we were going to be able to shift policy pretty broadly across the internet. And I think that responsibility is something that everyone appreciates. And then at the same time, like, because we've been so transparent about it internally, we haven't had, like, we haven't, like, a lot of the other, companies that are out there that have really struggled with kind of, wokeism to the extreme and other things. That just hasn't been an issue as much at Cloudflare. So, yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing that because it's an incredibly important example of how principled decision-making and a really clear mission can prevent problems from arising that other people really struggle with. And so although it is harder to be principled, it is in the long run easier to run your business. Mathew, I can't say enough how much I appreciate you coming on and for all that you do for the internet and our future.
Thanks, Eric. I really appreciate everything. And you've been wise counsel to us over the years. So really appreciate everything you do.
That's a great place to wrap. Thanks for joining me on the show today, Mathew. You've been listening to The Eric Ries Show. The Eric Ries Show is produced by Jordan Bornstein and Kiki Garthwaite. Research by Tom White and Melanie Rehack. Visual design by Reform Collective. Title theme by DB Music. I'm your host, Eric Ries. Thanks for listening and watching. See you next time.